Good evening. I would like to call this meeting of the Board of Education for School District 72 on April 5th, 2022 at 7:30 p.m. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I will start with the chairperson's remarks. Good evening. I acknowledge on behalf of the Board of Trustees that this meeting is being held on the traditional territory of the Wichita people. I am John Kerr, chairperson of the School District 72 Board of Education. In attendance this evening are Vice Chair Kat Eddy and Trustees Joyce McMahon, Richard Franklin, Susan Wilson, Trustee Hagan and Trustee Briggs are not here, are not able to attend tonight. Also in attendance are Superintendent Dr. Jeremy Morrow, Associate Superintendents Morgan Kyle and Phil Sismic, as well as Secretary Treasurer Kevin Patrick. Present also are Natalie Crawshaw, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent and Secretary Treasurer, Jennifer Patrick, Manager of Communications, and providing technical support is Jonathan Carriere, IT Technician. Please note that there is a 20-second production delay between the live event that you are viewing and the meeting participants. The question and answer function is open for questions on agenda items for this meeting. Questions that are posed during the meeting, and that's online, will be addressed at the end of the session. I will remind people that any questions that are posed should be or will be required to be on agenda items only. Since the last board meeting, staff and students and staff of School District 72 were able to enjoy a 2-week break. With all the stress and upheaval that has occurred this academic year, I hope that everyone had the opportunity to spend time with family and to decompress. We are now into the last 3 months of the school year, and with the change in weather and more daylight, it will be a good time to enjoy the opportunities that our beautiful surroundings have to offer. When students returned to school after the March break, the mask mandate was no longer in place. However, this has become a sensitive topic, and students and staff may choose to continue to wear a mask while others may choose not to. And I look around tonight and I see that there's evidence of that as I speak. I would ask that everyone respect the choices that others have made in this regard. As Dr. Henry has often said, be kind, be calm, be safe. On the topic of COVID-19, even though the provincial health officer has rescinded the mask mandate in public places, the danger of becoming infected with the virus remains. Recently, BA2, a new highly infectious form of the Omicron variant, has begun to become the dominant variant of COVID-19 in Europe and in the United States. We are almost certain to follow this trend over the next several weeks. Even people who have had 3 vaccinations have been susceptible to infection. Please keep this information in mind when you make your decision on the safety precautions that you choose to take. At the last board meeting on March 8th, I expressed my deep concern with the deficit that School District 72 is facing in the next budget year. I still have these concerns. The budget process will be starting shortly, so I would encourage those who would like to have input into the final budget that will be voted upon by the board in May to make a submission that outlines their thoughts on the budget. As the process unfolds, the magnitude of the difficulties that we are facing will become apparent. I haven't mentioned this for several months, but the district has yet to receive a response from the Ministry of Education with regards to the request to rebuild Cedar Elementary. I do not believe that this is a positive development, but I hope that I am wrong. In November, the board met with the Minister of Education to advocate for the school's replacement. The minister knows very well about the condition of the school. Should the ministry choose not to give approval for a rebuild of Cedar Elementary, the board will need to decide on the future of this outdated facility. Finally, Easter long weekend will occur at the end of next week. I wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday as you enjoy this short break, and that you all return prepared to make a strong ending to the school year. Okay, we will move on to approval of the, superintendent's remarks.
Thank you very much, Chairperson Kerr. And I've heard it said that we're about to start the busiest month in schools, April, May, June. That's how fast it'll go. It's going to go very quickly. So I wanted to share tonight some really positive news that our community and the school district continues to attract international students. And next year we will have a record number of students in attendance. And I wanted to share that as a result of that, we are actively looking for homestay families to host international students for the next school year. So if you are interested in pursuing that, there's information online, and there will be an information session actually happening on April 11th at 7 p.m. So you can check out our website for some information. So with the reduction in some of the pandemic protocols, I'm excited to share that both Carey High and Timberline will be showcasing their musicals this month. Carey High is showcasing Matilda, which actually opens tomorrow night, and Timberline will be showcasing Shrek, which will open at the end of April. So tickets for both musicals at both schools are available through those school websites. As Chair Kerr alluded to, over the next month or so, partners and stakeholders will be engaging in looking at our budget for the 2022-23 school year. While the estimated deficit that we are facing is approximately $2 million, we will be working hard to make decisions that minimize direct impacts on students while still moving forward with the goals on the board strategic plan in relation to student achievement, honoring learning and wellness, and honoring Indigenous worldviews and perspectives. So if you have feedback, on our website under news and announcements, you can view our budget toolkit, and there's information on our budget development process there. If you have any questions or feedback, you're welcome to connect with our Secretary Treasurer Kevin Patrick or with our Executive Assistant Natalie Crawshaw. All feedback that is received through the budget process will be considered, and there will be a final budget presentation in a public board meeting to the board on May 17th, and the Board of Education will be passing the final budget in a public meeting on May 31st. I want to just finish with sharing some good news as we start to get some warmer weather and some sunshine, that we are also hoping this spring to return to some of our traditional events for transitioning our students. So we're looking forward to moving and having opportunities for our current grade 5s and current grade 8s as they look at their new facility, and of course welcoming new families and kindergartners to our district. And also to share that this time both Carey High and Timberline are planning a return of commencement activities that we'll see at Strathcona Gardens. So hopefully things stay in a positive trajectory, and those more traditional graduation celebrations are able to commence again. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will move to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of March 8th. And the suggested motion is that the minutes of the meeting of March 8th, 2022 are hereby approved as circulated. Moved by Trustee Franklin, seconded by Trustee Eddy. Any discussion? All those in favor? The motion is carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes? Okay, hearing none. Are there any additions or alterations to the agenda? Okay, none. And we will move to the approval of the agenda. The suggested motion is that the agenda is hereby approved as circulated. Moved by Trustee Wilson, seconded by Trustee Eddy. All those in favor? Okay, the motion is carried. Okay, we'll move to report of board decisions from the April 5, 2022 confidential board meeting. Vice Chair Eddy.
So this evening in the confidential board meeting, we discussed issues regarding staffing and legal. We have concluded our agenda and will not be returning this evening.
Thank you. We will move to the next item on the agenda then. We don't have any public or agenda submissions, so we will move to educational submissions and the educational assistant mentorship program, and that's Sandra Maxwell. So Ms. Maxwell, if you'd like to, I take it there's more than Ms. Maxwell. So.
She'll introduce me.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. Okay, down here. I have to stand here. Okay. Just please, sorry. Right? Yeah. And then I can move this way. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you, trustee members. My name is Sandra Maxwell, and I am the EA peer mentor for School District 72. We've been piloting this since November 2nd, and I just want to present an update with our meetings. So thank you, I'm honored to be here tonight. Thank you for having us here tonight. Like I said, my start date was November 2nd. I visited 12 schools so far, and I've mentored, done 16 direct mentorships. Of those, I have impacted approximately 30 students with learning and their unique needs, with positive and continuing effect.
And one of the things we know of the mentorship piece is there's that direct service this year impacting the students that are, currently working with those educational assistants, but it's like that ripple effect that mentoring will just continue through the years and be supportive of the next students that our EAs are working with as well.
So our model, I actually networked with peer mentors over on the mainland, so in the Surrey School District and the Abbotsford District. And the peer mentors there, they do it on a voluntary basis. So what we've done is we've developed a form, and the mentees fill out a form, and then I go in, and this is who I assist. Educational assistance of all sorts. I offer one-to-one goal setting and strategy building and at the school site, and we are flexible on when. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'm heading to Cortez for doing 3 days. Instead of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I'll do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And we're there to build skills and confidence. The guidelines, these are our guidelines, and I join the mentees in their classroom settings and just do an observation mostly the first day, and then I carry on the second day offering resources and feedback.
I think, and that's a piece
Yes.
of that mentorship piece, will just like it's alongside the EA, so it is just while in the classroom setting, natural, authentic feedback in the moment that's happening with Sandra.
What we realized is I'm not just impacting EAs. This is who I'm impacting. I'm impacting the educational assistants as well as their students, the learning support services team, learning support teachers, classroom teachers, support workers, administration, and my union. In that, I'm just going to speak about the educational assistants for a moment. I really get in there and develop a relationship. As a mentor, the relationship is key for learning. And from there, I give the feedback and motivation. I model resources. I validate. It's a tough job. It's not an easy job going in. And I provide as much feedback and resources as I can and model as much as I can. And just encourage. We can do this, right? It's a great job. As far as our students go, I feel that they're emotionally supported by this. I feel that their academics are supported, their communication is supported, behavioral supports are offered, and we have resources to trial. All of this helps increase their independence. Anything to say on that?
I think I'll just add that having Sandra out there too is we're getting that feedback from schools and looking at patterns and sort of around, and Sandra will speak to that later, but around professional development opportunities that our educational assistants might need. We're also highlighting, we're so fortunate in our district that we have so many skilled EAs and highlighting some of those pieces. And this is just an additional piece that Sandra adds to that. But the other piece is the stories we get to hear about what's happening in school. So yeah, I think like Sandra's providing a bit of that bridge between all these pieces. So it's good.
It's been amazing. So bridging these departments, is having a positive effect on equitable learning and supportive in a supportive and caring manner. And that kind of speaks for itself. We just go in and really offer equitable learning in a supportive way. Do you have anything more on that?
No, I think it'll come out in the
Yeah.
next pieces.
Okay. What are our next steps? So by the end of this school year, we're hoping to offer the 2 learning opportunities of setting healthy professional boundaries and increasing independence. I'm working alongside the QP President, Andrea Craddock, on setting healthy professional boundaries, and we actually adapted that from a workshop that was done in Surrey. And for the increasing independence with our students, it's just, they can do it, right? And we just have to give them the opportunities. And that's what we're really promoting here. And that I'm working with Kylie Noble, one of our inclusion support teachers, and Poppard. Yes.
Around that increasing independence
Yes.
piece in particular.
Yeah.
And again, that developed as a result of being out there, kind of seeing some patterns and maybe some pro-need that needs to be offered, you know, on a district-wide level for our EAs, so that's great.
I've received a lot of positive feedback. So I sent out a form and it has 3 questions on it. How would you rate your experience with the peer mentor? And it's a 5-star rating. Across the board, I've received all 5 stars. The second question I asked is, what was the most helpful, useful thing you gained from this experience? And one of the responses was, I felt heard. Sandra took my concerns and wishes and ran with it, researching not only my student's syndrome, but medications and behavior techniques. She had suggestions for every aspect of his day. This caused me to reflect and think outside the box, rather than to continue in survival mode. She brought in several resources for me to use with my student. I'm already planning on using some suggestions with other students as well, so that's that effect. Win-win, thank you, Sandra. My third question is, please provide feedback that could further develop the EA mentoring program. Any ideas or suggestions? And this same EA, she put, it can be challenging to discuss behaviors with the student present. We need to be respectful, right? And so that's part of our development. So Brenda and I have discussed this with Andrea Craddock, and how can we, you know, just find time, even on a Teams call, just to say, you know, this is what I was seeing and this is how, you know, I would approach things. We had to talk in sort of code, whisper, and rush format. Would be great to have a block of time for discussion.
Yeah, so that, yeah, again, looking at opportunities, maybe through some of the LAF funding or other pieces.
Yes.
Yeah, in partnership with our union and Andrea Craddock around how we could add that piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe I'll just speak to, aside,
Yeah.
Sandra's had, you know, the feedback she's had on the sheets at the end, and then I'm just gonna, I've had some unsolicited feedback just being sent to me, and I thought this would be a nice opportunity, and for Sandra to hear as well.
Thank you.
So I am writing regarding the EA mentor position. Our school has used this service on numerous occasions, and the EAs are delighted to have support from a colleague. Sandra is absolutely professional and is the bridge between specialists coming in and giving instructions and actually putting the programs into action. This is resulting in better service for children with special needs and is building the skill of the EAs at the same time. This is absolutely an excellent idea and a win-win for everybody. And that was from one of our LST teachers. And then this is from one of our, another IST teacher in our district. Sandra Maxwell's EA mentoring program is an invaluable asset to SD 72. Her ability to respectfully communicate, teach, and model best practice to her colleagues in a way that has them immediately listen and follow through. Her knowledge of the needs of our most complex learners is unmatched. She is able to see the subtleties of their communicative behavior and responds immediately with calm compassion and skillful teaching. As an inclusion support teacher, I am seeing the benefits carrying over at many locations throughout the district. All staff within the building are learning from her. She is a valuable member of our learning support team. She is a change maker for our most challenging and complex students. So yeah, that's just feedback just sent to me. So nice opportunity to share because, you know, with your support, we're happy to have piloted this position this year. So it's nice to hear how it's going so far.
So in conclusion, I would just like to say thank you for having us this evening. This pilot has been an incredible experience for me, and it promotes equitable learning. Yeah, for me, we build too many walls and not enough bridges, according to Sir Isaac Newton, and I really feel like that bridge.
And removing some of the walls too.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, so if there's any
So say, if
questions from
anybody
the
has any
floor?
questions? Okay, Trustee Eddie.
Just wondering, Sandra, because you've been put in a unique pilot position, working with some of our staff members that are really right there digging in at the front lines, are there any kind of key things that have been bubbling up that you're kind of seeing across the board that EAs are requesting more support with?
Bubbling up.
Well, like when they come to you, are they saying like, I really need some help supporting challenging behavioral issues, or I really need some help with supporting literacy outcomes, or?
So our minimal speaking community, so our student population that really has limited language, seems to be a real focus. And one of the things that we're seeing is that just because they aren't speaking doesn't mean that they have to be constantly guided and directed. They understand what we're saying. And so that is something that we're promoting right now, and that's the increasing independence, is just pulling back and allowing the student to grow.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I think that's very good that you are working to make sure that kids don't become aid-dependent.
Right.
That their independence that's the ultimate goal for them, is to be able to function without constant support.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. One of the things you mentioned at the beginning was that I think you used the phrase that there was ongoing positive impact. And how do you determine that?
Through the feedback, really through the feedback. And then when I do my follow-up visits, I'm really seeing the EAs trying and working towards the goals. So we go in and we look at the goals, and I bring the resources, and I do the modeling of how to use the resources, and they're actually doing it. So, and that is having a positive impact on the student learning.
I think the other piece, and when it talks about bubbling up, is one thing, a few of the pieces of feedback has said is that in the moment, and sometimes when EAs are dealing with, challenging situations, escalated behaviors, and I think we've probably all been in moments when, you're heightened because you're in that, and having Sandra there as that voice, that one person described it as an outside brain, and I said, you just gave me that strategy that is completely, like, in that moment I didn't think about it, but it's shifted, and then it is shifted, how I've been dealing with the student and the behaviors we've been seeing. So just like, and I think it's that side by side and in the moment, and just that other person being able to give a strategy or something that might work. And then, we see that, like Sandra said, in the checkup, there's that checkup, how are things going, and has that made a positive impact for whatever it might be.
Okay, I'm going to ask my second question, and then I'll get to you, okay?
Go ahead, you ask yours.
Okay, on one of your slides, you have the phrase there, healthy professional boundaries. Will you explain what you mean by that?
So we've created a PowerPoint, and it's going in and just really explaining the difference between a personal relationship and a professional relationship in the workplace.
Okay. Trustee McMahon.
Yes, I'm curious. EAs, usually work one-on-one with students that require some extra support. are there opportunities within the EA universe for them to debrief with each other? Because I'm thinking, you know, that often is a very healthy process in being able to talk out those issues that you're, you know, maybe contemplating, that you need some outside brain, that you just need to hear yourself talking to know what you're thinking? Or are you their only source of an outside brain?
I think it can be limited.
Mhm.
So I do think that there are EA meetings within individual school settings, but I also know that at the end of the day, sometimes we go home and we take it with us, you know, and so you're right, that debriefing at the end of the day or after a situation is so important. And I think that is becoming more and more common, that there is somebody to debrief after a challenging situation. Yes.
Good, thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
I
Trustee
just
Wilson.
like to say how refreshing it is to hear such encouraging results in a very short period of time. That's really remarkable. So congratulations.
She's pretty remarkable.
Well, we work pretty hard. Yeah, we both have. So it's been a hard, it's hard work, but it's worthwhile. Yeah.
And it's amazing to see that whole connection of bridges, and the trickle down effect might not be the best term to use, but it's like that.
It is, we call it the snowball effect.
That's
right?
a nice,
Yes.
yeah.
Well, I can vouch for the value of education assistants. When I started my career, there weren't too many in the school system, but in the last half of my career, we started to see more. There were never enough, but the value that they added to the educational experience, not only for the children that they were directly working with, but for other children as well, it was well worth it. So I appreciate what you're doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, we will move on then to business administration. There's no elected and board matters or work educational issues tonight, so we will move on to business administration. Secretary Treasurer Patrick.
Yes, we're looking for approval of the finance warrant for February.
Okay, moved by Trustee Franklin, seconded by Trustee Eddy. Is there any discussion or questions? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, motion is passed. Okay, sorry, I didn't read that properly. Anyway, we'll move then to 13B, capital plan response letter and bylaw, and
Yeah, so there's some good news here. The ministry has approved funding for the projects listed in this letter. So this is for the minor capital. So we've got major capital, which would have been the cedar replacement, which we don't have. But what we do have are some mechanical upgrades for some of our schools, Quadra, South Gates, roofing, and they're funded. They're under minor capital, but they're actually funded through slightly different programs. We've got school enhancement program that funds, that's the SEP, there's 2 HVAC upgrades and a roof. As well as you have a carbon neutral capital plan, which also funds some HVAC upgrades. And what the intention of that is we pay a carbon tax and then they turn around and give it back to us to basically reduce our carbon footprint, which is what that is. And then just below that, you can see that we received approval for some buses too, which is great because a newer bus means less repairs and hopefully more fuel efficiency and helps us to contain some of our costs. So so this is for the minor capital. If there were any major capital announcements, they are not part of this, so separate. So what we have here does not necessarily mean that there's nothing else coming, but this is what we have so far. So we are looking for the board to pass a bylaw approving this, and then that will give us access to the funds so we can start spending, which we've already started to get the ball rolling in some of these projects.
The suggested motion reads that the capital plan bylaw number 2022-23 CPS D72-01 for the projects identified in the March 15, 2022 capital plan response letter from the Ministry of Education be given all three readings at this meeting. We have a mover for that, please. Trustee Wilson, Trustee Franklin. Is there any discussion? Yes.
I have a question, Secretary Treasurer Patrick. With the current rates of inflation and knowing that these grants probably went in about a year ago, do you think that the funding supplied for these minor capital projects will be enough to meet the outcomes?
Great question. One of them is not, one of them is. So what happens for the project or projects that exceed the funding? The first thing we do is we go back to the ministry and ask for more money. If they say they don't have any more money available, then we ask to use the Ministry of Education restricted capital that we currently have, which is like $1.8 million. And usually they will say yes. If they were to say no, then we would go into our annual facility grant. So, so for that one that was over, the ministry said they did not have further, but they did approve the Ministry of Education restricted capital. So it doesn't have an impact on our day-to-day budgets. It is coming from a, basically, even though it's on our books, it's a ministry controlled fund that will give us access. So, because the other alternative is to not proceed with the project.
So to decline the funding and just like, we can't do that this year, we'll put it on next year's application sort of thing.
Which we haven't had to do. Luckily, we've still been able to proceed.
Thank you.
Okay, Trustee McMahon?
I have a question that just occurred to me. What happens to the buses that are being retired?
So we have the board has a disposal policy, and we will put it, we usually utilize a site or a service called BC Bid. It's run through the government. That's a way to dispose of surplus equipment. So it's an auction based. So it's not getting passed on to a friend of a friend at a great deal. It is basically being presented to the public and anybody, so it ensures that the board will get the best value for that.
So we get that money.
We do, we get to keep it, and usually it's, you know, but
Yeah.
2,000, could be 5,000 or $10,000. It will go into local capital or miscellaneous revenue for us, and will be available to be used by other students. So, you know, we have a small fleet of backup buses, and we'll always make sure that the best bus that gets funded ends up in that fleet. The worst go to BC.
Great, thank you.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, we will go to the first reading. And the motion is that the capital plan bylaw number 2022/23 CPSD 72-01 for projects identified in the March 15, 2022 capital plan response letter from the Ministry of Education is hereby read for the first time. Can I have a mover for that, please? Trustee Franklin, Trustee McMahon. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, the motion is passed. Okay, we'll go to the second reading. That the capital plan bylaw number 2022/23 CPSD 72-01 for projects identified in the March 15, 2022 capital plan response letter from the Ministry of Education is hereby read for the second time. Moved by Trustee Eddy, seconded by Trustee Wilson. Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you. And for the final, that the capital plan bylaw number 2022/23 CPSD 72-01 for projects identified in the March 15, 2022 capital plan response letter from the Ministry of Education is hereby read for the third time, passed and adopted. Moved by Trustee Eddy, seconded by Trustee Wilson. Discussion? All those in favor? Okay, the motion is passed. Okay, we then move on to operating budget development update. Secretary Treasurer Patrick.
Okay, so as the Superintendent Morrow mentioned earlier, we are beginning this budget process with a $1.95 million deficit. This deficit is more than what we expected, what I expected, and it really is a continuation of the impacts of COVID with illness and the inflationary pressures. Now, usually at this meeting, I would be coming to the board and asking for, identifying what the deficit was and asking for the board to use up to 1/3 of the unrestricted surplus to balance the budget. And it really gave the process, it usually reduced the amount that we were looking for if we were doing small reductions, or more recently, it would actually give the district an opportunity to add a few things. And now use of that 1/3 is board policy, and really what it was meant to do is to kind of use up some of the surplus as per the government's directive, but also it would reduce and smooth out some reductions typically, as it's a declining 1/3 balance. But this year, we're not going to be requesting a use of 1/3. So the management team has been aware of the deficit and been looking at and working on this for quite some time. And why we're not going to be asking for a use of 1/3 is because of the uncertainties with the cost escalations. So we, for the 22-23 year, our costs came in like $1 million over what we expected. It was a big draw on deficit, $3 million total. And a big part of that was, as I mentioned earlier, the illness and the inflation. Those impacts are continuing into next year. Our board was able to deal with the surprise this year because of the surplus. But because there's less of that surplus available next year, we don't have the same ability to do a $3 million deficit, and it would be quite less. So what management would like to do is to suggest that the board balance, the district balance fully the budget, remove the structural deficit. It'll allow a year for costs to hopefully to normalize so that we know what our sick use will be, to get a better idea of what the costs in escalations will be. So yeah, so we kind of are missing that step this year. We are beginning our budget function, our formal budget conversations with our budget function groups this week, with our principals this week. We actually did start conversations with our principals much earlier because of the scale of the deficit, and to just have deeper conversations, looking at what impacts are going to be, because any cut has its impact. We're aware of that. We want to make sure that we can, align to minimize the impacts on the strategic plan and the board's priorities. So we're gathering lots of information. We're meeting with more people, with more groups this year, the parents, Indigenous Advisory Committee, students, multiple principal meetings, and of course our budget function committee. We're also seeking feedback. Like anything that comes to me, it's considered by management and shared with the board. And we'll, of course, share the proposal at May 17th. Now, it is a big number. I am confident that we'll find that we do have options. There, again, try to minimize the impacts on students, try to continue to support the strategic priorities. So, so it is a big, but I'm hopeful not to overly concern or try to scare people, because it will be possible for our board to find some reductions, and again, really try to spread out or minimize some of the impact. So it will be a tough year. It is a tough year, but the best way for us to move through this will be talking to people, finding out what the impacts will be, and again, trying to align and minimize the impacts from that GBEP and the strategic priorities. So.
Are there any questions or comments? Trustee McMahon.
Is there some kind of a format set up on our website to invite feedback?
So we have very formal processes for the partner groups that we talk to. I'll share out some documents. So we do have a budget toolkit that's on the website. Beyond that, any submission, whether they're questions or whether it's sort of ideas, feedback, even just values, can be submitted to myself or Natalie, and we compile all that information and we consider it for final recommendations to the board.
Thank you.
Other questions? I guess I have one. I think, I know when I addressed this last meeting, my understanding was that the January inflation rate was 5.1%. And with the amount of money, with the amount of our costs that are subject to inflation, came to the amount of inflationary pressures of about $450,000. In February, the figure I got was the inflation rate was 5.7%, which takes our added costs to about $500,000. That's a quarter of our deficit right there. The inflationary cost is a quarter of our upcoming deficit. And with inflation going the way it is, it might even go higher. So just, I guess it's a concern that for me is that inflationary costs are not factored into the grant that we get from the provincial government. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, so the government is not funding it, and I've often called it a stealth cut. You know, that our inflation goes up, but the grants don't go up to cover it. And we're not a profit-making business here. We can only operate on the grants that we get from the government. So if we get a grant from the government and we have an additional $500,000 of costs, that means that we have to find that somewhere. And that's just one of the pressures that we have. My rant for the night, I guess.
That amount is very, yes, that amount was roughly the amount that we worked into the budget next year due to inflationary pressures.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments on Secretary Treasurer Patrick's report? Yes.
I'd just like to thank you, Kevin, for your thoughtfulness and your approach to the budget. Knowing that we were coming into a deficit year in an extraordinary time, there were risks that could never have been predicted. And by way of comparison to other districts that are seeing minimal growth, we'll be okay with balancing the budget. Yes, it will hurt. There will be some costs to some pieces in our school district, but I truly believe that there will be minimal impacts to the kids in our classrooms. And I appreciate your foresight in planning ahead for something so unforeseeable.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, there are no committee reports. Is there any other business? Okay, we will then move to questions from anyone present on agenda items for this meeting. Are there any questions that have come in, Ms. Patrick?
No questions have come in on the live feed, so unless there's a question from a member of the gallery.
Okay, well, let's give it another 30 seconds or so. If nothing comes in after, an hour of meeting, it's probably not gonna come in now. Or 45 minutes of meeting, I should say. It's not gonna come in now. Okay, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Oh my goodness.
Who does it?
So light.
Okay,
Oh.
trustee A, seconded by trustee McMahon, all those in favor?
Yay!
Okay, we are done for the evening. Thank you very much.